Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 285 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Today, we're excited to welcome our guest, Hilary McNair, a therapeutic counsellor, counselling supervisor and lecturer. Today, she shares an area of her practice called Canine Therapy. She talks about her therapy dog, Oscar, and how he and she works with clients.
Thank you, Rory. I'm looking forward to listening to Hilary. I'm definitely a dog person myself. But of course, before we reach Practice Matters, where we're going to be hearing from Hilary, we're going to be first stopping at Student Services, where today we're going to be speaking about getting your assignment in order. And if you're listening to this in real time, there's never been a better time. If you have got a little bit of a break and some time on your hands, we're going to be telling you how you might be able to knock some chunks off your assignments. And then we go into ethical, sustainable practice today, where we're going to be looking at the ripple effect. And that is how the abuse narratives in the media may generate inquiries. And of course, then we end with Practice Matters, as Rory has said, with Hilary on Canine Therapy. But starting off with those Student Services, Rory, getting your assignment in order.
Yes, and we've strategically placed this topic in episode 285, because if you're listening in real time, it will be the episode that goes out before Christmas of 2023. However, you might be listening to this separately in years to come. And one of the reasons we put it in was because certainly in the UK, and tutors tend to set assignments over holiday periods. And the reason for that is that our thinking is that you're not going to be in class, so you've probably got that time to do your assignment, you see. That's how we think. And it's a bit of a paradox, because holidays are usually the time when there's no support about. So you're not going to be in class. You're not going to be, seeing your peers. So as a consequence, most people end up doing their assignments on their own. So the first thing about getting your assignment in order, I think, is getting some sort of support system in place. You know, if you're in a class with peers, a lot of people now have WhatsApp or social media groups that they could go into and talk about the assignments and get some support. You know, I think that slugging around an assignment on your own, I can remember from my student days, it can be a pretty lonely endeavour, because, you've got no one to talk to and no one to check your ideas out with. So first of all, get some support. And then the next thing, I think, is to think about what the assignment is asking you. And I think one of the biggest tricks of cracking assignments is actually working out the question that's being asked.
Yes. Understanding the question, it is so often a reason for referral. You may have full knowledge of the theory or the topic you're being asked, but it's very easy to kind of get sidetracked. And I think it would be a miss not to mention If you are a member of the Counselling Study Resources, we call it the CSR. It's a library that Rory and I built with the help of many other tutors and lecturers, and it basically contains lectures on the main counselling topics. It also covers skills, and it also covers practice like note-taking, contracting, stuff like that. But built into that is also an academic writing course. It's delivered by a counselling tutor, and it's kind of specifically for students. And the very first thing that it mentions in that academic writing course is the importance of really understanding what the question is asking you. And something I learned from my daughter, Kristen, who is now in her third year at university, and she's always looking for study hacks and ways of doing things. What she does is she takes the question that she's being asked, and then she takes a highlighter, and she highlights only the important words, not the ands and the buts, just exactly what is being asked. So if it says compare and contrast person-centered counselling with CBT and transactional analysis, she would highlight compare and contrast. That is the Bloom's verb of what you're being asked to do. And then she'd underline person-centered therapy, and then as she's answering it, she keeps on referring back and looking only at the highlighted words and saying all the time, am I answering that question? Am I answering that question? So for an example, if an assignment question said, please explain Carl Rogers' necessary and sufficient conditions. Yeah. If we started going in to Carl Rogers was an influential counselor from such a date to such a date, none of it matters. The fact is true, and you may have learnt that and studied that, but it's only looking for the information that it asks for. And I think that is really more important than you would think, Rory.
It's absolutely the key to it all, because, I don't think what's sometimes mentioned to students is tutors use something called Bloom's taxonomy. That sounds quite grand. But basically, Benjamin Bloom was an educationalist, and he used language and verbs to describing words to help get the information that's necessary. So when you start on maybe an introduction course, you may be asked to list. So think about going in the supermarket, list 5 different makers of beans. So, you go, Blog's beans, Rory's beans, Ken's beans, and you write a list down, you take it back, and the tutor goes, that's brilliant, you made a list. And that is really at the bottom of the thinking pyramid. It's a fun exercise. You can do it in different classes, but it's the bottom of the pyramid of learning. You've learned how to make a list. And then as you move up, you may be doing, your certificate or your diploma. Then you're asked to do things like, explain. And explain is very simply, if you were stood at the supermarket and someone said, can you tell me where the bread section is? And you'd explain to them, you go up the aisle, you turn right, you look on the left, and there's your bread. That's an explanation. And then you can go into a deeper explanation of things. And then you might be asked to critically analyze. And people go, oh, critically, that's so hard. We do it all the time. If you're buying anything, you're analyzing. So if you're in the bread section, as we're walking through the supermarket, if you're in the bread section, you're thinking, I may have only so much to spend. And I look at this bread and I think, am I going to spend money on this bread? The analysis is, is this bread better for me? Is it a high quality bread? Am I going to enjoy it more? Or over maybe, I could get 2 loaves of bread for the same price as buying a more expensive loaf. And then, a critical analysis might be, but if I buy the more expensive bread, what's going to happen? It's better for me, and that's going to impact on my on my digestive system, and that's going to inform my health, and then I evidence how it'll inform my health. We do it all the time, but I think when we offer these Bloom's verbs just in an assignment, they can be very, very overwhelming. But I can guarantee you, no matter what you're asked, whether it's evaluate, compare and contrast, whether it's explain, you do it all the time in your life. You're doing it every single day. You just don't realize you're doing it.
Yeah, I think the challenge is I hear you, But the challenge is decoding that. So when you're asked to critically analyze, nobody's explaining about the bread and how you're critically analyzing all the time. You just see the word critical analysis, and then you see a certain theory, and it's daunting. I know it was for me, very, very much so. And what may help you with this is decoding those because we're speaking now about fully understanding the question. Decode the words. So if you go onto something like Google and you put in critical analysis and then you put in the word academic, you're going to be hit with a load of university sites and learning provider sites where they give you a really nice explanation of what they mean. And if you take that explanation and you write it down and make sure you fully understand it, so if I've got to critically analyze, what does that really mean? Copy and paste that or write it down and then put your theory next to it so you got something to refer back to, so you know that you are answering the question that has been asked of you. I think another tip in terms of getting your assignment in order is having some form of a plan of what you're going to tackle, when you're going to tackle it. It may be a large body of work. So if you're doing you're in year 2 of a diploma, chances are you have to hand in a massive piece of work at the end of that. And that piece of work is done a bit at a time. And if you set a plan up of when you're going to do what, it really, really is helpful. And even if you've just got a holiday break and you're going to be attacking an assignment or a part of an assignment, set the times, the when, the how, and the where is this going to take place, rather than going into the holiday break saying, by the end of this break, I'm going to have this assignment done. That's great. That's a wonderful goal. But having a goal is only half the journey. How are you going to get to that goal? What are the steps? Well, maybe the steps are, my energy levels are at their best in the morning, so I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to lock myself away in my study and I'm going to spend 1 hour a day on it. There you go. There's now a plan of how you're going to kind of make your way through that. And halfway through my break, I want to be at this point in my assignment, so you can kind of measure, are you at that point? So set yourself a little timetable or a structure or a pathway to get to the goal, rather than just focusing on the goal itself. I have to get this assignment in, because what tends to happen is the closer you get to the deadline of having to put that assignment in, the more the anxiety can build up, unless you have maybe started that or you have a plan of how you're going to do that. So, and when the anxiety comes up, it becomes even more difficult to focus down. It does for me. I'm speaking for myself here. It becomes even more difficult for me to focus down, and I find myself making myself busy with other things. So rather than doing my assignment, I think, well, I can't do my assignment with such a messy desk, so I'll clear my desk. Actually, you know what? I'm going to clear the whole office. I'm going to vacuum the carpet, because that's going to... And the question is, does that get me closer to my assignment? No, but it keeps me busy. So having the plan in place, know what the question is, have a plan in place or a timetable and the steps that you're going to take and when they are going to be really specific in that. And the more specific you are, the more measurable your process will be, and hopefully that will help guide you to that goal.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. Yes, and I think it is actually decoding what the question is asking you. And I think one of the other things that's really useful is to look at the reading list. You usually get a reading list that's required, certainly in diploma and certificate and diploma and above degrees, masters. So make sure you've got your books. And we've talked about in other podcasts about, not trying to read books from cover to cover, academic books, but only look at the question that's being asked. So you start at the back of the book, you go into the index, and if your assignment is critically analyze empathy, what you would do is you would open your book and find the areas that have got empathy in them, put your post-it notes in those chapters or by those pages, and that's where you would start your reading. You don't have to read the entire book in the hope that you kind of stumble across something on empathy. That's why they have an index in the back, and then you can start to jot your ideas down. You can either write them if you're a pen and paper person. Some people like the idea of being connected to pen and paper. Doesn't work for me, I have to say. Or you can write them down, in a text document on your computer, and then what you're starting to do is build an idea from from literature about empathy and how it can be used well, how it might not be able to. You've got some really good examples, and once you've got that idea from other people, then you can start integrating your own ideas and start to answer the question. So I think it's really important that certainly if you're doing, certificate and diploma, if there is a reading list, it might only be a couple of books usually on certificate, might be more. Start with your reading first to get a good understanding to supplement your learning in class. And once you've got that and you've got your notes, then it might be that you look at the assignment question through different eyes.
Yeah. What you're speaking about there, Rory, is building a framework. So you'll go to your reference resources, whatever you're using to reference. It might be your own handwritten notes. If you're a member of the Counselling Study Resource, that's our resource library for students. Then we've got what we call Lever, which is our library virtual assistant, where you could put in what is empathy, and Lever would go through it works on AI, and it goes through all of the resources we have and it pulls them out. And I want to mention the Counselling Tutor resources are not written by Rory and I. We don't sit here going, now what is empathy, and writing this. We're taking the information from the literature, from the texts. So when you're referencing that, you can reference the actual texts that are referenced on that, and we use a counselling researcher to get the information and bring that together. So you've got your information. So when you're answering the question, so if it's critically analyze empathy, you write the question at the top. And when you go through your resources, you're just looking to build a framework. You're looking at what are the ingredients of that. So you might say, go around and you might see a definition of empathy. You go, oh, that's nice. And you'll just pop that in. Next line, you might see an example of good empathy, and you might put that in. And you'll slowly just build up your keywords or very, very short sentences under your questions before you actually sit down to write it. So that makes it easier because you've got a scaffolding. You've got kind of the key vocabulary that the person who's assessing this assignment is going to look for. It doesn't make much sense. It might not run in the right order, but you've got it down under the question heading. So when you do come to write that assignment, it's basically joining up all the little bits you've lifted from your recommended reading, your notes, your resources, the slides of the presentations you had, whatever it may be, and you're joining them together in a way that kind of makes it make sense and gives the information. But you start by putting that trigger vocabulary is what we use. Trigger vocabulary. So if we were writing about person-centered theory, our trigger vocabulary might be the six necessary and the six necessary and sufficient conditions. I'll put my new teeth in here, and you'd put that down. You might have empathy. You might have non-directive. You might write down Carl Rogers. You might write down, as you were saying earlier, I think in our last podcast, Rory, a inside out. You'd write down your key bits before answering the question and filling in the sentences and making it make sense. Absolutely. And there's some little hacks you can do. So first of all, if you're asked to, explain person-centered counselling theory, what to do is just to write down the theories, go through your notes. So you'd start off with 6 necessary and sufficient conditions, 7 stages of the process, 19 propositions. You might write down Carl Rogers. You might write down empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. And what you've got is the trigger vocabulary, because that's what tutors want to see. And I think that what can happen
is, and I've had this many times in tutorials, I'm sure you have, Ken, where someone's written an assignment, you know they're capable of writing the assignment and they know their stuff. However, they don't put it on the paper and they say to you, but you know I know this. You know I know it. And it's a case of, yes, I know you know it, but I have to evidence it to a third party. The whole part of writing an assignment is so that a third party can look at it who doesn't know you. And that happens because every year someone from the awarding body or someone from the university, if you're at a university, will have a look at a selection of work and they don't know who you are, but they will look at that and they will look at the question asked and they will say, has this person displayed a knowledge of the question being asked? Not, oh, we know that, we know this person knows. So it's really important that you get all those trigger vocabularies in, and it's a joy to mark as a tutor because you go along, you go, oh, yep, that's one, that's two, yes, there we go, we've got 19 propositions in there, 7 stages of the process, empathy, congruence, unconditional, positive regard. So you know that they put the theories in. And with certainly MVQ courses, not so much university ones, but MVQ courses, it's essential. An MVQ course is one you would do at a college or a training provider, things like CPCAB or AIM Awards or COSCA for our friends in Scotland. They have their NVQ courses, in other words, the National Vocational Qualifications, as they're called now, where you'd be expected to show the theory and understand it and name the theories you're being asked. So it's really important to get those trigger vocabulary in terms of the theory written down and just tick them off as you put them through your assignment. And that really does help. Really does.
Yeah, one of the tips in the academic writing course in Counselling Study Resource Library suggests write the answer to your assignment question, no matter what level you're at, as if you were explaining it to maybe a 16-year-old person. Write it as if they don't know that you know anything. You have to kind of simplify it down. And I don't mean simplify it down as in make it super simple, but assume that the person reading it thinks you know nothing. So assuming, like you said, Rory, but I know Carl Rogers' theory, Rory. I thought that was a given in my assignment. I wanted to kind of put some meat on that. But no, we have to assume that person thinks you know nothing. So explain it to somebody as if they were hearing it for the first time is how to write that. So you've now got kind of understanding the question, you've got kind of how to put a framework together, you're now writing that out and making sure you're covering all that trigger vocabulary. Don't worry too much about your word count as you're going through, because very often, again, you'll have a word count for a certain section, and that, again, can start building up anxiety. Oh, I'm only halfway through this question, and already I'm over the word count. Oh, dear. And as soon as we get into that anxious phase, we're not able to think and be free. I speak again for myself here, Rory. I'm not. when the cortisol starts pumping in the brain, the thinking dulls for me, and I know that the science kind of shows for many others as well. So don't worry too much about that word count. You're going to be able to come back to that at a later stage. Make sure you've got what you need to say and you've joined everything up first. Then you can go through and you take your question. You hold the question on the one side, and you've got your answer to that question on the other side. You read the question, read the first line of your answer, and you say, is that answering that question? And then you read the second line, is it answering that question? And the third line, is it answer? And when you come to a line that's not answering that question, take it away. Because if it's not answering the question, it does not need to be there. You're not going to get any extra points for it. In fact, it's going to detract for you. And that's where you can kind of make up on word count by removing filler, by removing that is not asked, by removing any excess information that we weren't required to put in. Remember, the question they ask us is all we need to answer. It is all of the marks are to that question and that question alone. Anything outside of that, does not matter. And then once you've got it down to a reasonable word count, the next phase in that is read it out loud. It's so different when you're looking at it. You've just written it. And I always recommend put a break in between these two. Maybe come back the next day, open it up, and read it out loud. And if you can, record yourself reading it out loud and then listen to your recording. And as you're listening to your recording, put your question in front of yourself and ask yourself, am I hearing what this question is asking me? We keep on coming back to that question.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
And then a final phase on that. If you have got yourself, and I think we've mentioned before, get yourself into a peer group where others are as excited about the theory and the journey that you're going on. You can get peer feedback on some of your stuff as well, depending on what the content is and whether you're writing about clients and all that. So it's not in all cases, but getting somebody else to read over it for you is very acceptable, and to kind of get some thoughts from them as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And I think it wouldn't be right for us to not cover some of the psychological processes that go on in assignment writing. And I know from my own experience when I was a student, I wanted to prove to my tutor just how clever I was.
Yeah.
And that, of course, puts me straight into a child ego state in the world of transactional analysis. And I was back at, certainly nursery school. I want to be the cleverest. And the thing is that we have to manage that within ourselves. Writing assignments isn't about how clever you are. It is about how you've understood the information that's been taught and how you can repeat it. I know that might sound very simplistic, but that's it. They want to know, have you understood what's being taught? And in some cases, how you can apply it. And one of the things that I've a couple of things as someone who's dyslexic is useful. Certainly reading your assignment, because when I read things, it's the only time I can pick up that I misspelt them. It's a strange process. I can look at something and it looks fine. If I read it, as soon as I've read it, it's almost like another part of my brain pings in and says, "Oh, that's a misspelling." So I can pick that up. That might just be a peculiarity in me. It might not fit for everybody else. And the other thing is, what colour is the wall test? Now, when I was teaching, I used to say to the students before we set assignments, we're going to do a little exercise. I want you to write down on a piece of paper what colour is the wall at the back of the classroom, and they'd sit down. And you could see the people who were going to struggle, because those are the people who wrote reams and reams and reams of information. And I'd say, right, what colour's the wall? They go, well, the skirting board's white. There's a picture on the wall, and there's 2 light switches to the right-hand side. And they'd say, okay, just hold that there. And I'd say to the other person, what colour's the wall? They'd go, grey. And they'd say, that's a pass.
Yeah.
That's a pass. And, I think there's a tendency for humans to fill in information that they might find interesting themselves. It's about answering the question. It's about looking at the question and saying, this is all the information I have to impart. And I think why people struggle is because as humans, we tend not to do that unless you're in certain situations. If you're in the military, or if you're in maybe emergency services, they're taught to impart just the information that's needed. Whereas in conversation, we tend to elaborate our conversations and fill it in with little bits of information we need. That's great for a conversation with a friend, but for an academic paper, you literally have to be very disciplined and put in only what's asked. And it can be really frustrating for someone who says, well, I could put this in because this is interesting. It is interesting, but it's not interesting to the tutor. The tutor's only interested in marking the paper. That sounds terribly harsh, I know, but that will make your life a lot easier if you just cut away the stuff that is frankly irrelevant and only put the information in that the question asks you.
We have got a super duper handout. It's 9 pages long, this. It's called Getting Your Assignment in Order. It covers a raft of tips on writing your assignment, getting your assignment done on time. It covers things like the Bloom verbs that Rory mentioned in the kind of the beginning of this topic, explains what they are, gives you a little bit of a breakdown of those. Really, really handy. You can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 285. It's right there. You can download it. And that is today's Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com. As we move out of student services, we go into our ethical, sustainable practice, and an interesting topic, and I'm going to be open here, not a topic I know much about at all. So I'm excited to hear you tell us a little bit about this, Rory, because I know you've done some research into it. And you've called this the ripple effect, and you're talking about how abuse narratives in the media generate inquiries for counsellors and psychotherapists.
Yes. So we're recording this podcast as we're coming up to Christmas in the UK, and people who are selling, retailers, supermarkets, they already know that Christmas is going to be a demand for certain things, and they stock their shelves with them. If you walk around the supermarket at Christmas, if it's Christmas, you're listening to this during the Christmas season, you'll see Christmas trees and Santas and all the kind of stuff that we would expect at this time of the year, the time this podcast is being recorded. And as a private practitioner, I think it's very useful to adopt the same type of mindset when listening to the media, so we can prepare ourselves for the conversations and the phone calls we might get. Well, one of the things that I've noticed through the years, certainly in my own practice when I was a private practitioner, and certainly speaking to clients, is if there is any extended media coverage of inquiries into child abuse or big stories such as Jimmy Savile. For those people who are not listening in the UK, Jimmy Savile was a disc jockey who was a prolific sexual offender to children and young people, and to other people. He was a very malevolent character. And when that story broke, therapists' phones rang off the hook, because what happens is, as those stories break and the survivor stories are told, it triggers clients who've never spoken about such things to reach out for help. And I've seen it time and time again. When the Savile inquiry, there was a huge piece, certainly here in the UK, around Jimmy Savile. And I know from colleagues and people I've spoken to, phones rang off the hook, and they were clients were asking about specific support for specific things. So having that in mind, if you're watching the media and that something comes up, there's a good chance that there's going to be someone phoning you up that's been triggered by that. They may not say that. They may not say, I've been watching the television and I've seen this documentary. However, if it's something that's really rattling through the media, you'll find that the phone will ring and people will be asking for help with issues that are not unlike what's being talked about in the media. And I'll give you a very good example of that, which kind of proved the point. A few years ago, there was a football coach, and if you're listening in the US, that would be soccer to you, a football coach, a male football coach who abused young male footballers. And the amount of men that phoned me up looking for help after that was made public was noticeable. I had 5 or 6 phone calls. And knowing by this time I'd understood this process, I was better able to really, really engage with those clients over the phone. And I was kind of forewarned, a bit like the Christmas analogy I'm using. I was forewarned. I knew exactly I could guess why they'd phoned up. We never talked about it. We never said, have you seen this on the TV? But it was no coincidence in my mind that this was on the TV, it was in the media, it was in the newspapers, it was on the radio, and all of a sudden we got these phone calls. So I think being better able to serve your clients by being aware of themes that generate increases in inquiries, Ken.
Yeah, that is a really interesting topic, and it's kind of it keys into behavioral psychology, really, that so often trauma is hidden away in the mind somewhere. And I'm not suggesting that the person doesn't remember the memories. I'm just talking that it is buried deep. It's not looked at. It's not something that comes out in a day-to-day interaction, but perhaps a film, but perhaps something that comes on the television might trigger that, might renew that, might bring that top of mind again. And suddenly the person has gone from being in a pretty okay state, getting on with their life and coping with their day-to-day, to being back in a traumatized situation where it is very real and very new again for them, even though it may have been some years ago. And it may result in that person kind of reaching out. So that is the one mechanism of what kind of triggers that. And the other mechanism is the permission to do so. The permission to do so, that we see. I'm thinking of the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was absolutely massive. It was worldwide. It was absolutely massive, and there was almost a calling it out as it is. So there can be behavioral mechanisms of that person. They took the courage to stand up and say this. I too, I'm going to do that. I almost have that permission. And it's very interesting. I was looking yesterday just at human psychology and the herd nature of humans. Now, I'm not in any way relating us to herd animals or cattle, but the herd nature. And it can be seen in things like at an airport, if you have two travelators going in exactly the same direction, if the main crowd kind of takes one of those travelators, then everybody kind of follows on and gets on that. It takes somebody to break off and go to the other one before someone goes, hey, hold on, there's another one there that nobody's using. I'm just going to go on to that one. It's almost like a permission is granted to break the way things are. And that can happen from things coming up in the news. And of course, these feelings can also be triggered by other actions as well, even seeing a film. And very often, I mean, this is known. That's why they may say at the end of a program or going into a program, if you are affected by any of the material covered in, then here's a telephone number or go to this website. And I think that specifically when it's news related, we should be taking note of that. I'm often asked by those that join our CPD library, or kind of when I speak to them, if we're doing a one-on-one onboarding or something, they'll say, I don't know where to start. There's just so much stuff in here. There's like hundreds and hundreds of different presentation topics. Where would I start? Well, that would kind of be a great place to start. If you saw something come on the news that was representing a certain topic, go and have a look. Maybe do some CPD on that topic in service of a customer if they do reach out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As these media narratives expand, that's a great place to do your CPD, and get prepared, and also just develop your learning. And I think there's also another important psychological factor that plays out in this, Ken. You cannot be what you cannot see. You cannot be what you cannot see. A lot of abuse is hidden, it's interjected. People are frightened, they try not to think about it. And some, that's a successful strategy and they just move on with their lives. For others, it's something that is with them all the time and they want the help, but they're just frightened to ask. even in our information technology times, I met clients who were just very ashamed, blaming themselves. And when you see people in the media, and I have to say that I saw two men who'd been abusing a children's home and they were being interviewed. And I just thought, first of all, how courageous, but also how giving, because they were sitting there, they were middle-aged men, and they were sat talking about their experiences. And I thought there's going to be other people looking at that, seeing them and thinking, if they can speak about it and get help, and maybe, in the process of that, bring the perpetrators to justice, I can do it too. And, I think we have to thank the media for that. I think it's easy to knock the media in a lot of ways. And, I think sometimes they do need a bit of knocking. But in cases like this, as you say, Ken, that's why they have the phone numbers. And those phone numbers will be hot. People will be phoning them up because it triggers. And I think, I think as professionals, if we have an idea of why that has happened, why that client has phoned us up, and we're forewarned, we're better able to engage with them and to halt any of the processes that stop people coming to therapy, such as guilt, it was my fault, or, well, it was a long time ago. And at the times, I remember speaking to a number of clients, and the analogy I'd give is that A, they thought they weren't worth listening to, or B, they thought that no one would believe them, or C, they thought that really it wasn't the kind of thing you talked about, and it had impacted on their lives and their health. And just to understand that, and just to be able to say, yeah, we'd like to come in for half an hour, get to know you session, for no charge. They get to, are we a good match for each other? Meant so much in people's lives. Yeah. And I guess, if you're making your living from being a therapist, you've got to pay your bills, and you've got to keep food in the cupboard. That helps, to gain new clients. You are running a business after all. You need to earn. So keep an eye on that. And I'd be interested, but maybe put information in our Facebook group. If you're in our Facebook group, Counselling Tutor in Facebook, come and join us. Maybe that's a conversation you could share. What's your experience of high profile cases that have come into the media, and has that increased phone calls? There's been lots of programs on the TV here in the UK recently about mass murderers, about hebephiles and pedophiles. And I'm convinced that, that generates inquiries. And the key thing is we need to be ready as therapists for those inquiries and have a kind of understanding of why that person's contacted us now.
Yeah. And if, again, it can inform CPD, and even if there aren't any inquiries, having a direction for CPD is always very, very useful. And one CPD I would recommend everyone do, if you haven't done it, is trauma, studying up on trauma, trauma-informed practice, because what we're talking about, these triggers, they live in trauma. And so often, we've spoken about some of the mechanisms that may prompt somebody to reach out to you after many, many years and decades. When that trauma is hidden, when it's kind of kept inside and maybe not looked at for decades and decades, the trauma exists almost in the mind of the age of the person that it happened to, So maybe things were said like, we this is our little secret, we're not going to tell anybody, and that's then buried, and many years later, a grown adult, you're kind of still holding that secret, even though there's part of you screaming to kind of get that out, and I just think it's so in service of our clients to at least do the training. Trauma training, so important. And of course, as always, Rory and I are not experts on this. We're two colleagues having it as well. You're an expert on trauma-informed practice. Rory built a course on it. But we are two colleagues. We're having a discussion about topics that come up, and we're more interested in what that means to you and how it might inform your practice and what you might take into supervision or what CPD you might choose to kind of delve into from the topics that we bring up. And we hope that ethical, sustainable practice has been useful for you today.
Yes, and if you're listening to this and it has brought up any issues, you can reach out. There's a number of contacts. Speak to people. Speak to your peers if you're a therapist. If you're a general member of the public watching this, then there's a number of charities. The Samaritans is always a good starting place, or your local mind. Reach out for help because there is help available, and you don't have to suffer. You don't have to suffer on your own. You can get that help that you need. Thank
you, Rory. That kind of brings us now on to Practice Matters. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. And today I'm really excited. My tail is wagging. And the reason I'm excited, we've got Hilary McNair that you reached out and spoke to on Canine Therapy, Rory. And I just want to share, I've just recently come back from Phoenix in the USA. I was there at a conference. And one of the things that they had at the conference were little puppies. They had an organization, a charitable organization that would bring in little puppies that you could go and spend a little bit of time with and watch the puppies and hold a puppy maybe and stroke the puppies when they were happy to do so, the puppies that is. And in speaking with the handlers, they were sharing how therapeutic it is taking the dogs around and using therapy dogs and all of that kind of stuff. And I certainly found it. I'm a neurodivergent individual, so conferences or lights and sounds and people I don't know and environments that I'm not sure with, and it can bring up anxiety. And I really found just sitting with the puppies so beneficial. So I'm really looking forward to your chat, Rory, that you had with Hilary on this canine therapy.
Yes, and just to remind ourselves, this isn't the first time we've talked about animal-assisted therapy. In episode 241 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, we talked to Dr. Danielle Mills about equine therapy, the use of horses in therapy. And if you want to listen to that episode as well, then go to Counselling Tutor, go into the podcast tab, episode 241. It's the third subject in the podcast, and we talked to Dr. Danielle Mills about equine therapy. But today, I caught up with Hilary McNair and her dog Oscar, who was, if you listen carefully, you may very well hear Oscar in the background contributing and talking about canine therapy. And this is what she and he had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice, that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
In the counselling world, there are many different approaches and ways of working with clients. For some, it is face-to-face therapy. For some, it could be online. And for some, it may be using a third party in the room to build a connection and to build regulation and trust. In episode 241 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, we talked about equine therapy, the use of horses to provide therapy and regulation to clients who may have gone through a difficult time. So it's my great pleasure to speak today to Hilary McNair, who is a canine therapist with her dog, Oscar. So Hilary, it's a real pleasure to meet you.
It's lovely to be here. Yes, Oscar's sitting quite near to me as well, listening in to see what's said.
Well, there we go. And I guess that's starting point, isn't it? Oscar's as attentive as you are by the sound of it. So what brought you to the idea of using a therapy dog, to using Oscar in your practice?
Well, I guess, if I think to myself, I don't know whether you've got a pet or not. Do you have a pet?
No. I've had
You don't have
I've had them in the past, but not now. No.
You've had them in the past. Well, I guess, the connection that I feel with Oscar is amazing. If I'm feeling a bit down or something like that, having a cuddle with Oscar is really precious. And I can often sound mad when I'm speaking to Oscar, and he kind of makes me feel safe and loved and cared for. And all those things are things really that you want to bring into a counselling relationship, that unconditional positive regard that a dog can bring, that kind of emotional regulation that happens when you're with a dog. Research says so much about it. It says that it actually lowers our blood pressure. It's been shown to help with depression, with anxiety. Even having a therapy dog around has been shown to help reduce the sensation of pain in hospitals and things like that. And so when you think of all that research, you think, well, why not make the most of this in the counselling room?
Absolutely. And I'll pick up on quite an important point. Some clients may want to be tactile, to be held and to feel the love of something. And it's not really appropriate for therapists to go and hug their clients. That could lead into all sorts of difficulties. I mean, I know therapists may, embrace the clients at the end of a session or maybe at the end of a series of sessions. But to have something that can be used in session, a dog kind of is that kind of central ground, isn't it? The dog can sit on the lap of the client maybe, and you can and it can feel connected. Would that be a fair assessment?
Absolutely, definitely. It's so complex when we think of touch in the counselling room between counsellor and client, and there's so much behind that you have to think about. But when you've got a dog in the room that's there, often sitting next to or on the client's lap, there's an immediate tactile response there. And to just see how clients can stroke and pet, and you watch their face light up and you watch the barriers come down because there's a connection there that they really, really feel with the dog. And then as a result of that, they'll often share to a much greater depth because they have that feeling of safety and trust. And they're also very much in the here and now moment. It really connects to mindfulness and kind of experiencing things very much in the here and now. So, I often work in a very gestalt way. So I might ask a client how they're feeling internally as they stroke the dog and how it feels against their hand and what it might be bringing up for them. So suddenly it becomes experiential rather than talking about. There are so many advantages, and it's amazing to see.
And I can hear, and I hope the listener can hear your enthusiasm about this. You're quite clearly enthusiastic about this direction of therapy, using a dog, Oscar in this case, to support clients. And I guess it also speaks to regulation. One of the things that clients may struggle with, I guess, certainly those who've experienced trauma or maybe attachment issues, is the ability to regulate themselves. And I guess stroking a dog or any kind of animal is a great way of finding regulation.
Absolutely. It can become the safe attachment for the client. The client connects where they might not have had that safe connection and before in their lives, and suddenly to have this. And, we know from counselling theory that when we come from a safe base, we can explore things more readily. So in providing that safe place in the counselling room, then the client is ready to explore material that may have felt too scary to look at until this moment.
Absolutely. And you say you're a Gestalt therapist, so contact is a big part of Gestalt, isn't it? Being in contact with yourself. And I guess that, being able to connect yourself internally when you're holding an animal is maybe easier facilitated than maybe just for some clients than just sitting in front of a therapist. There's something to hold or to touch.
Yes, absolutely. And, we talk in Gestalt about self actually happening at the contact boundary. So what better way to do that than have the dog right next to you so that you're really connecting, and then the self can be looked at.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'm sure there are some people listening, or the listener is listening. We always speak about the listener in these, pretending there's only one person listening. I might be thinking, well, I've got a dog, and maybe I could use it as a therapy dog. Are there any considerations that you have to take on or think about before you take what effectively is your family pet and bring it in as a therapy dog? What kind of thinking needs to be? What's the process of that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because, it can be easy to think, oh, I want my pet to be with me and do this, that and the other. And actually, there are so many considerations to kind of work through until you get to that process of actually, will this work? I mean, first of all, does your dog like being around people? Maybe your dog doesn't want to be a therapy dog,
Yes.
It's a two-way thing. And then there are all sorts of little things that you need to notice about the temperament of a dog. Does it like being petted? Is it calm in difficult situations? Because when there's a lot of emotion around, can the dog cope with that? Or is the dog feeling very stressed in that situation? Will the dog settle next to somebody? Will the dog... Can the dog do basic commands like sit, lie down, all those things? Can the dog respond to the leave command in case something's dropped on the floor that could be dangerous to the dog to do it? Does the dog jump up on people? All these things, there's a lot that needs to be thought about in terms of whether the dog is right in this situation.
Absolutely. And I guess you'd have to give consideration to things like client preferences. Some clients may like to have a dog in the room, and some clients may like to have a dog sat on the lap. Others may not like dogs at all. There must be people in the world who just don't like dogs.
Yeah, I don't understand it personally, but there are people out there. But yes, it's important that it's something that the client wants to do, very much so. And there are boundaries both ways, and it needs to be talked about in a first session. We need to find out whether there are any phobias or any allergies, of course, with a dog present. And then we need to talk about boundaries with your dog, so I will share where my dog likes petting, and, it's got very sensitive paws. It's not too keen on being touched on the paws, but back and head and ears, he absolutely loves. And a tummy rub he will love too. But also, if the client finds it too much in a session and wants to have a break, then that is fine too. And it's important that the client feels they can say that. So, I work from home, so it's easy to let the dog in or out of the room. And we also have to let clients know that sometimes the dog might not be in the right place to come to the session. So if the dog's feeling a bit under the weather or something like that, there's that acceptance that the dog is important too. And in doing this, I'm hoping to mirror good self-care, good boundaries, which is all an important part of the process.
Yes, I think that's really interesting. The dog's an autonomous entity in itself. If it doesn't feel like coming in and being petted, then it won't. And I think that's the incredible message to clients, isn't it? Some clients who may be of the more giving nature feel they have to be there for everyone. Just the fact that you may say, well, the dog's not really feeling it today. He's having a lie down in front of the fire. It's an indication that if it's okay for the dog, if it's okay for Oscar, then it's okay for the client.
Yeah, and it's important to actually use immediacy and notice what's going on between the client and Oscar, because it's all grist for the mill, so to speak, in the counselling process. So if the dog wants to be petted more than the client wants to give the petting, how does that kind of sit in the client's lives as well? What's it like to be kind of needed too much, more than the client can cope with? And then you've got a whole different conversation and a whole way into something that's happening in the client's life. Again, you're working from the experiential of the here and now in the counselling room.
think that's really interesting. You're almost using the Oscar as a metaphor for how the client may react to other relationships that they have externally of the therapy room.
Absolutely. And it's about kind of really being in tune with Oscar and seeing Oscar as part of the process. You know, he's not just a dog in the room. He's a dog that's going to take part in the therapy. And, you know, we need to think about whether the goals that the client comes with is relevant to having a therapy dog there. You know, how is the therapy dog enhancing the process? And if it's not relevant to have it with a particular client, then you wouldn't. You know, you need to kind of think about the planning aspect of it.
I think that's interesting. So it's not a case of you come into counselling and there'll be a therapy dog. It is about forethinking, you know, maybe with the client, maybe just in your own space, thinking about how is Oscar going to be of service to this client? And is it relevant that Oscar should be involved in this process?
So just like, you know, in our training, we learn how to kind of explain what counselling is and how it works and what the roadmap is. It's similar with a therapy dog. We need to explain what the part is of the therapy dog in the session, because if the client doesn't know, then the roadmap is not going to be followed. You're both going to be going in different directions. Yes. But if there's a known understanding of why the therapy dog is present and how the therapy dog can help, then you can take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, I think this is fantastic. As I say, I'd interviewed someone in podcast 241 on equine therapy, and they talked about the mirror neurons, those particles in the brain. Sometimes they're referred to as empathy particles, where you know, an animal and a human can meet, and if there's trust there, the animal regulates itself, the person could regulate itself, and there's a kind of very special trusting relationship, and obviously that sounds to me like it's the same when they're working with Oscar.
Absolutely. You know, sometimes when I've worked with children and they've come to the room and there's a real barrier up and you can see it in their eyes, you know, they are not going to talk and all this sort of thing. Then they get down, they meet with Oscar, they play with Oscar, and you almost literally see the barriers falling down. And as the young person or the child communicates with Oscar, so they start communicating more with me, because they're also observing my relationship with Oscar. You know, it's interesting because, you know, I teach at Counselling World, and when I take Oscar into sessions, because the students like to learn how to work with a therapy dog too, it's interesting that I've had students say to me, oh, it's bringing out the maternal side of you as when Oscar is in.
Yes.
And they see different aspects of me when Oscar is present, and a client will do that in the same way.
I think this is really, 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 really fascinating. You know, I'm always kind of inspired by therapists who use a kind of a different take, look through a different prism, a different optic when they come to their practice. And clearly you are, you know, using a therapy dog is a very different optic on a very practical level. In terms of things like insurance, do you have to inform your insurance that you're using a dog, or is that something that comes up?
Yes, I am insured to work with Oscar, so I just spoke to my insurance company and explained what I did, and actually it was no problem at all. It was just important that I told them that. But there are all sorts of other health and safety considerations that we have to think through when we have got a dog in the room. Because if we don't work at home in particular, we've got to think, is the environment safe for the dog? Is it too much? Will it get sensory overload? You know, is it fair for the dog? Is there somewhere for the dog to go to relieve itself in breaks and things like that?
Yes.
There are all these things that need thinking through.
Yes, I think this has been a phenomenally insightful door opening to a world that I knew very little about, you know, before I interviewed you. And I think it's really, really fascinating. It just goes to prove that, you know, you can have a kind of, I don't know, animal integration therapy where you integrate animals and your own modality to help clients. I think it's brilliant. So, Hilary McNair, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Hilary, a massive thank you to Oscar. I did hear you in the background. Thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out and holding these conversations. This has been episode 285 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off at the top with student services, getting your assignments in order, a discussion about how maybe during any kind of break, you may want to get your assignments in order and start that process of writing your assignments and, of course, passing your assignments. Onto ethical, sustainable practice. We talked about the difficult conversation regarding the fact that when the media talk about issues of abuse narratives, our phones ring, and how we meet our clients and how we have a background understanding of why they've chosen now to phone. And then we moved on to practice matters. I caught up with Hilary McNair and her dog Oscar talking about Canine Therapy. And before we close out today's episode, I've got a couple of quick favours to ask you, the listener. First, if you've enjoyed and benefited from our conversation today, please leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It genuinely helps us reach more ears and grow our community. And secondly, if someone in your circle might benefit from our discussions, share the podcast episode on your social media platforms. Word of mouth is so powerful, and we appreciate every share, tweet, or X as it is now, or post that brings new listeners into our community. And thank you for allowing us to be part of your journey. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, then you will love the Counselling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Oaks to give you the support you need during your counselling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counsellingtutor.com/CSR. That's counsellingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.